Welcome back to the Communication Mastery Podcast with me, Mark Berlinson. This is where we unleash the power of understanding to build bridges and not boxes, because we understand that communication is the soil in which teamwork grows. And for this year-end episode, we're going to do questions from you, the audience, and my responses to those questions. So let's see where we get to, shall we? Question 1. If you're in a meeting and someone keeps interrupting, how do you handle it without being rude? That's a big one, isn't it? Because if someone's interrupting you because they have something against you, then the strategy for that is going to be different from someone who's interrupting just because they need to be heard. If someone's interrupting you because they want to hijack your contribution or sideline your contribution, you need to pull on the strength of maybe your mover language and simply kindly but firmly state, I'd like you to hear my opinion, please, or I'd like you to receive what I have to offer here. But if they're interrupting out of their own need to be heard, then very often what you have to do is to actually draw in the rest of the meeting. And so you might say, well, thank you for your contribution. We've heard you, but now let's ask others what they think. Or let's get some contributions from around the table so that we get a full range of views. Again, in that case, you'll often need to make sure you persist with your own input. And resisting the urge to get frustrated is going to be the biggest challenge in that setting. But everyone has to breathe, so even if they're interrupting constantly, you can jump in when they take a breath and cut them off. And you could practice doing that ahead of time if you know you're going to have a meeting that's going to be full of interruptions like that. It's frustrating when that happens, but I've found in the past that you can very often train somebody out of that. If it's the same person every time and it's a team that's meeting regularly, you'll need to meet with that person outside of the meeting to say to them, listen, I really need everybody's opinions, or I'd like to involve all the different voices around the table. And so although I know you have plenty to offer, I'd like you to make sure that we hear from others as well, please, or something like that. And if you're not the authority in the meeting, then if it doesn't work the first time around, you'll need to go to the person running the meeting and have them step in on your behalf to help that to happen. So I hope that's helpful. Question 2, when a friend shuts down during a tough conversation, how can you help them open up? I think here the life languages understandings would be very valuable because people shut down for all kinds of different reasons. Sometimes people shut down because it's touched an emotional nerve, whatever the conversation is about, and they've maybe withdrawn to their own thinking or recollection of some maybe painful event or an event in their past that's caused emotion to be strong for them. Maybe a very pleasurable event, but something that causes them to be distracted from the conversation. Maybe that's the cause of their shutting down. But given it's a tough conversation, it's more likely that you're pressing in on something that they don't want to face. And so then you need to ask yourself those diagnostic questions. Is my friend, this person I'm talking to, are they a feeling type person? They're working from emotions, or are they much more cognitive and they're working with their thoughts, not their feelings? Or maybe they're more of a kinesthetic, action-oriented person and they've shut down simply because they feel like this is not going anywhere. Whatever your diagnosis of the language realm, the intelligence category that you're having the interaction in, that will determine your responses and the way you handle that. If they're shutting down because they feel that there's no resolution coming, you can cut right across that and say, let's see if we can come to some resolution here. Or what would you suggest as a way to move toward resolution? If it's more of a cognitive shutdown where maybe it's the contemplator language that says I'm no longer interested in having this conversation because it's too difficult or because it doesn't grab my intellect, then you need to look for ways to open that door again if you need to continue the conversation. Sometimes it's fine to accept that the conversation has shut down and then leave the remainder of the interaction for another day or another time. If it's an emotional reaction, that's the one you need to be a little more careful with because it's easy to hurt someone in the emotive realm if you don't handle it rightly. And so you need to determine whether the person is shutting down because of something in their own heart and their own reaction, or whether they're shutting down in response to just how difficult the conversation is. Because you'll handle those in different ways. If they're shutting down because of something that's triggered in them, then you may need to offer to them, I see that this is hard for you. Would you like us to hit pause and resume the conversation at another time? Or, depending on the circumstances, maybe you'd like to say, would you like us to involve a neutral third person to help us talk about this? Because that can also be a helpful situation. I know I've got some clients right now who I'm interacting with to help them have difficult conversations around their working relationship. And I'm enjoying that because it's what I'm trained for, and they're finding it helpful. If, on the other hand, the person is shutting down simply because this is a hard conversation, then usually acknowledging that it's hard is enough to help them continue to engage. So simply say, hey, I realize this is hard. It's hard for me too, but let's see if we can get through to a conclusion or a resolution. All right, question number 3. If a coworker misinterprets your email and gets upset, how do you clear up the misunderstanding? Gosh, this is so common because emails can be so easily misunderstood. Same with texts as well. This is why I say to my clients, you should never resolve a difference or a difficulty just through email or by text. It needs to be at least a voice-to-voice conversation, if not a face-to-face conversation. But if a coworker has misinterpreted your email, and depends how you've got to become aware of it, of course. They may confront you with it, in which case you can deal with it face-to-face, or it may be that you've heard through the grapevine that they're upset, or you see in another email they send you. If you get a response back to an email or a text, by email or text, that shows that they're offended or they're upset, then you need to, as soon as you can, aim for a voice-to-voice or face-to-face interaction around that misunderstanding, so that you can clear it up. Because those reactions, those interactions rather, include tone of voice. They include the feedback loops of communication where we see one another's facial expressions or body language. And it gives us the opportunity to go back and forth in real time rather than in those bite-sized pieces of what was written that can often be more rigid and more settled than they were intended to be. If you're being confronted by a coworker, obviously the first thing to do if they've misunderstood you is to apologize, because we need to own our own fault in not communicating in a way that the other person could receive it. So I'm really sorry, I didn't intend to upset you. I didn't intend for this to be a problem for you. May we talk about it now, or would you like to schedule another time? Important not to put them on the spot and say, deal with it right now, in case they are wanting to process it more cognitively after receiving your apology. But those are the ways that you can begin to open the doorway to the best form of communication, which is always face-to-face with an understanding of different communication styles and with a third person, a neutral person, to help you if it's particularly emotive. All right, question 4. How would you ask for a raise without sounding demanding? Wow. In my own life, I've only asked for a raise a few times, but I have helped others with this. I think the first thing that comes to mind is to make sure that you pick your right time. So if there's maybe a point in your work cycle, every job has its cycles, doesn't it? When you've reached a successful conclusion, maybe to a project, or you've completed a task successfully, or maybe an event that you're involved in has come to an end and everybody's pleased. Those times are always better times to ask for recognition of your role rather than just in the everyday interactions. The other thing to do would be to be clear on your own contribution to the team and to the workplace. So have it quantified in your own mind. What have I contributed to the success of our work group or of our company or whoever it may be that you're asking for the raise before you go to your manager? The third is to have a dialogue and not a demand. So to say, could we have a conversation about how to maybe bring my remuneration in line with my experience or in line with the value I'm bringing to the projects we're doing. You're leaving the door open. The worst thing to do would be to sound demanding, maybe, circulate a letter to all of your colleagues on the same pay grade and submit it to the manager saying, we've done our research and we're underpaid and you need to recognize that. That puts the manager on the spot and it makes it hard for them to respond fairly and equitably. But if you pick your time, you aim for dialogue and not demand, and also you're very clear on your own value, the final thing that I would suggest is that you also ask for any feedback of how you could improve to be more valuable to the manager specifically or to the company as a whole. And that would then show that you're willing to grow, that you're willing to develop, that you're flexible, rather than simply demanding more money. All of those things are helpful, that would avoid you sounding demanding, but should still get recognition for you in an equitable setting. All right, number 5 here. If a team member isn't contributing in group discussions, how do you encourage them to speak up? That's a tough one, isn't it? Because there are folks in any group who tend to sit back and remain quiet. And again, you're going to need to use your understanding of different communication styles to know how to approach that. Very seldom is it the action-oriented people who are not speaking up, whether it's to say this thing needs to change if they're high in the mover language, or to say when are we going to get this finished or when are we going to get this done, these things all need to be done by yesterday kind of approach for the doer language. Usually they're fairly comfortable speaking up, even if there might be an edge to it if they're in distress. However, if it's a cognitive holding back, again, you're probably looking at cognitive languages in distress to some extent, where they either feel like there isn't a plan, that would be the shaper language, in which case making clear that there is a plan and some of the steps along the way will often draw in a shaper who's holding back because they feel like this isn't going anywhere directly. On the other hand, if it's the contemplator language holding back, it's because they're thinking deeply and they probably need more time. And so you can approach that with saying to them, hey, so-and-so, I'd really love to hear what you think in a moment or two when you've had time to think about it. Let's ask somebody else first, but I'd really like to hear from you as well before we finish today. Something like that gives them space to know that you want to draw them in, but you're not putting them on the spot. Putting someone on the spot like that is often the hardest way for them to contribute because they feel exposed or they feel pressured. The emotive languages tend to be able to contribute easily unless, again, they feel that they're not being heard. And so for the responder language, that would be a question of making sure they know that you care about their opinion. I really care about what you would have to offer to our discussion. I know you have creative ideas, things like that. Something that acknowledges the strength that the person is bringing and invites them in without pushing them in. The influencer language, again, typically not shy about giving their opinion and stepping in unless their overall intensity is low. And then that would be a question of having a conversation with them between team meetings just to say, hey, you know what? I know you can encourage with your enthusiasm, but I notice that you're not bringing it, maybe because you feel like it's not welcome. I want to invite that in. And just the sense of invitation and being included will often be enough to help them step in, maybe in the next discussion. So I hope those different ideas help you. And if you're confused by those different categories, reach out to me. I'd be glad to help you understand those 7 different categories more fully. All right, here's one I am familiar with. Number 6, when someone gives you harsh criticism, how do you respond without getting defensive? Well, you do get defensive. I don't think any of us would not get defensive when somebody offers us harsh criticism. But the trick would be to keep the defensiveness within yourself rather than projecting it back on the person offering the criticism, because that would break down the communication too easily. So if you can find ways to disagree internally, maybe, first off, so that you can take a breath and pause and then ask for more input. We've had an episode of the podcast about receiving feedback. Harsh criticism, of course, doesn't really count as feedback, but the principles still apply. And so the feedback that they're giving, there may be a grain of truth in there that's worth you grabbing, even if you have to reject 90% of what they're saying. And so part of the key is to invite more input. That's, of course, very difficult if the criticism is harsh. However, if you respond in a measured and thoughtful way, that will often defuse the harshness of the criticism. And even if it doesn't, you need to teach yourself to see the harshness as coming from the person who's giving it rather than as deserved by you. unless you know in your heart that you've done something really stupid and you deserve that criticism. But I'm trusting that wouldn't be the case. And so when you're asking for more information or more feedback, that actually disarms the person who feels harsh toward you, because often the harshness is because they're expecting you to not receive what they're saying. Taking the choice, albeit a difficult choice, to receive the criticism, maybe not to agree with it, but to receive it, to hear it, is a very powerful way of disarming the onslaught, if you like. And so it takes practice, and you won't get it right every time. If you do become defensive and maybe even lash out at the person who's giving you the criticism, be sure and apologize later, because otherwise you're cutting off a source of feedback that, even if it's only 10% true, is still 10% valuable. And every one of us can learn from the feedback we're given. So filtering out the harshness by keeping it internal, taking a deep breath, recognizing that you can discuss with others maybe, is this true of me? Do you see this in me? Not pushing the other person under the bus, not so-and-so said this to me, what do you think? But I've heard it said about me that I'm like this. Is that true? I had a situation the other week. I was talking to a lady who'd had a misunderstanding with a friend at a sporting social event. They do exercise together most weeks, and this friend had totally misunderstood something. So this lady came to me and just said, I had a conflict with this lady. She was very harsh and critical about me, but she had the wisdom, because we've spoken before, she had the wisdom to go and ask a couple of others in that same group, hey, so-and-so was just really harsh with me, and I don't want them to I don't want them to hear about this, because I don't want to blame them, but do you see this in me? So there was an openness and a willingness to receive input. And this particular lady, the feedback she got was completely the opposite, that enabled her to see that the harshness was really something in the hurt in the person that was criticizing, and not to do with what she had done. But depending on whose fault it is, and it's usually 50-50 or maybe 80-20, but it's never 100 and 0. So if I can own my own fault, even if it's only a small percentage of what's being criticized, then that will often defuse the situation. Hope that helps. Okay, number 7. Got time for maybe one or two more here. If you're delivering bad news to someone, how can you soften the blow while staying honest? And again, that will depend on the kind of person you're talking to. So the way I would approach that with a cognitive person would be very different from the way I'd approach it with an emotive person or a kinesthetic person. Those three categories are really fairly distinct in the way they receive news and in the way that they receive communication. But if I've got to give bad news to an action-oriented person, then I'm going to usually go straight to the facts and tell it to them straight. I would preface it by saying, I'm afraid I need to tell you something that's not going to be something you'll want to hear, or I'm afraid I've got some bad news to share with you, so that they're prepared for me to tell them. But then I would simply tell them in as gentle but straightforward terms as possible. For an emotive person, I would need to be a little more careful to establish that emotive connection first. Something along the lines of, hey, friend, you know that I really care about you, and I want you to understand that although I've got some hard, difficult, bad news to share with you, that I want to stand with you as you process this, or something like that, that creates a heart connection before I speak out whatever it is. And with that, I would try to soften it somewhat and move into it more gently, so as not to shock the person's emotions with the suddenness of the news. With a cognitive person, if they're more in the sort of planning mode, the shaper, or maybe the management mode, the producer, then I would usually couch it in facts and figures, or in the details of what I had to share. Maybe it's bad news about the results this quarter. Well, you know that our goal was this, and I'm afraid I need to let you know that we fell far short of that. The details were this and this and this. The difference with the contemplator, the thoughtful, deep, philosophical person, is that I would need to approach it more philosophically. And so there, I wouldn't go straight for the facts of the figures. I would go more along the lines of helping them to think their way into the bad news, where I would share more of the background, or maybe more of the process that's involved, so they can come with me into this. And so I'm not violating their filter question of, am I interested? I take them on a short but caring journey into the bad news that I had to share. So again, different approaches for different people. That's going to be probably the answer with most of these. But let's do one more. How do you handle a conversation with someone who's speaking over your head or using jargon? Well, usually a person who's speaking over your head or using jargon is somebody who either doesn't realize they're doing it, or they're doing it intentionally to gain a position above you. And so typically what you can do in that sort of situation is to say, I really appreciate the information you're sharing, but I wonder if you could give me the detail in simpler terms, because I want to be sure I'm hearing you without any misunderstanding. Those kinds of approaches. So you're inviting them down to your level. Not that your level is down, but they're trying to make it seem that way. And if that doesn't work, then the other way you can approach it is to say, I'm terribly sorry, I'm not understanding. I wonder if there's someone else who could communicate this to me, which would then remove them and take away their ability to prove their superiority. And if you have to, you may have to do that. But hopefully, using one of those two approaches, you can navigate through that talking down, jargon-oriented approach, and hopefully form a connection, because there are very few people in this world that it's not worth connecting with at some level. So that's it for this week. And we're going to do questions and responses again in a few weeks' time. But for now, please text a friend and invite them to listen if any of these have been helpful to them. And we'll see you back here in the new year with another episode.